Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello, homeschoolers, and welcome back to Homeschool Together. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have a chance, head down into the show notes. We're going to have links and to all the things, as well as our YouTube channel and how to support the podcast. If you have a chance, leave us a review and maybe check out some of our resource guides as well. So today we are on part 2. Last week on Monday, we released our first episode regarding deschooling. We talked a lot about sort of the meta view of deschooling, and I think today we're going to get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of how you would want to approach the act of deschooling, some ideas on what you can, take home and plan that and put that into practice and see if that can help you and your learner as you guys transition out of kind of a more traditional education environment into a homeschooling environment or a co-op or a parent partnership, whatever you choose to do in your homeschool with your student. Ariel, homeschooling and deschooling.
Yeah, I have so much to say.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, we had to break this into 2 pieces because our first piece, if you haven't listened to that yet, that was last week's episode. Matt will link it in the show notes, but I highly recommend that you start there because we talk about the importance of deschooling and some of the challenges that you might encounter when you start to deschool and things you need to kind of keep in mind that you might, things that might crop up. So I think that's a really good place to start. But just to kind of ground us here, deschooling is this process of changing your mindset. And this is not just your learner, but this is also you changing your mindset from school environment to a homeschool environment. And they're very different. Mm-hmm. So if your kids are coming from school, this is that time when they're going to, change over into the mode of homeschooling. If your kids have never been to school, but you, of course, went to school, there's very few multi-generational homeschoolers out there. We have met some, but in general, we have a lot of baggage that we're bringing into this experience from our own public or private school past that we need to kind of deschool ourselves. So it's amazing how something that happened to you, I mean, in my case, stuff that happened to me 30 years ago still impacts the way that I think about some parts of schooling. Mm-hmm. So it is really important that this is not just about kids, this is about parents too. But a general rule of thumb is that this is going to be about a month for every year your kid was in school. So then question, does this mean that since we were in school for, 13 years and then we went to college for 4, so 17, is this going to take me 2 years to get over? So that's rhetorical. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
It might be, and you know.
And I still find myself, and we are like in our fourth year of homeschooling, and I still find myself at times having to go, no, Ariel, they're not in school. Don't worry about it. Take a step back. So I think that stuff is really ingrained in us the longer that we went to school and that whole culture of school.
Well, especially when you're I've started to notice when we get into this more rigorous aspect where I'm expecting, my learner to know things. And she's doing that well in math and whatnot and reading as well. But, when it comes to our ancient history journey that we're starting to chronicle on YouTube, if you want to follow along, I'm trying to start to think about okay, is she needs to sort of pay attention and
there's some assessment. You want to know that she's grokking it.
And I've got to make sure that I'm not pushing too hard on that because do realize she is 2nd grade. She's not going to expect
but
who are all these people and where all these places are.
We do want this to be valuable still. And the older that she gets, and I know this is going to be a problem when we get into middle school and then high school, that there's going to be a lot of feelings that I have, and I wonder if you kind of have to deschool homeschool as a parent at each level, right? So right now we're both deschooling our elementary school experiences. And then when we get into middle school, there's gonna be a lot to unpack in middle school. Middle school was hard I don't know a single person who said, gosh, my favorite years were middle school. Everybody has like these terrible memories of being, it's such an awkward time. And I digress. Anyway, so it's a month for every year that they were in school. And then that's just a guidelines. It could be less, it could be more. And deschooling is not a period when you know that you're done. And I think that's especially true with parents, is that it may be something that you have to kind of come back with. I've done a lot of therapy for my anxiety, and it's one of the things that the teacher says, like, never cured, but it's just something that you live with, and you may have to like face it every once in a while. And I think for our kids, if they haven't been in school very long, they probably are curable. But as adults, I don't know if we're curable. I think that every once in a while it crops back up, and we have to like remind ourselves, no, wait, it's cool. We're homeschooling. So this is that transition period. There isn't a defined end to it necessarily. And it looks different for every family. And it's really important to know that during this deschooling period, it doesn't mean that we are not homeschooling. We're actively homeschooling. But I loved what you said before we started, that you said it's the intention and the attention. This is that really intentional period where we're giving lots of focus to the fact that we know that we're changing our cultural mindset. So I think that's really great. Let's get into the steps.
So first one that we have here is transparency. And this is something I always, I really lean on, because I think a lot of times when we are trying to, covertly do something like, hey, mom and dad are approaching this idea of deschooling, and you're trying to do things and handle things, and you're watching and you're trying to do these methods, and it may seem a little awkward to the learner, and they're trying to be like, mom's acting weird or dad's acting strange about this type of stuff. They never really cared as much before. Why are they caring now? And all this type of interpreting what they're experiencing. I always find that it's almost like a romance movie, those like rom-coms, like if they would just talk in the first 20 minutes, the movie would be over.
There wouldn't be a movie if everyone would just communicate in any romantic comedy ever.
and we always talk about, communication being super important for, not just a relationship with your spouse, but also with your children. And I think transparency is that first. I think it's the first piece of homeschooling is this open dialogue and this experience, this open and authentic experience. And I think we always talk about that, like the authenticity. And I think with authenticity is a measure of transparency that comes from, they don't have to know everything.
No, but I think you need to be really transparent and open and honest with them about why you've chosen homeschooling, whatever your reasons are that, you as a parent have made this decision. Unless this was like their decision and you're just supporting them in that because they're an older student. You need to talk with them about, why are we doing this? What is our purpose? And really connect with your core purpose for homeschooling and explain to them why you think that this is going to be better for them, for the family. Be open with them about the fact that this is a transition time and that it might be a little rocky and that you're going to get through this together. As we said last week, this is a team sport. So really emphasizing with them that you're going to work through any concerns that they have, and you're going to work through issues and you're going to work through those together, I think is really important.
But also your feelings as well. Like, their feelings on being transitioned to be a homeschooler, your feelings as being an educator, right? And then the emotions around the fact that you are now a parent educator, which can be very difficult because you're a disciplinarian parent, the love you give to them and the relationships you have with them. Now you have to also tell them they're right and wrong, and you need to work harder, and you need to do all this type of stuff. And that may not have been something we did before. And it's just another layer of emotions.
It's a different
and
role. And I think a lot of parents definitely feel apprehension. Unless you have an educational background, you might feel a lot of apprehension at now being a parent educator. So this is the time when you need to be open and honest with your kids about your feelings stepping into this. Hey, I'm feeling kind of nervous about this new role. I'm a little bit worried about teaching math or whatever. And this is not to lay a bunch of worries on their shoulders. Definitely not. This, you need to find a mom bestie to do that with, that you can like talk with and share with, that kind of thing. This isn't to burden them. This is to be open with them and share with them that you may have some unease as well.
Show them the vulnerability and that you're willing to show that you're a little bit of vulnerable, so that if you're in that situation with your learner, that they will also be vulnerable back to you and tell you what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And that's, I think, really important, especially when you're trying to figure out what is going to work best. It's a little bit easier when they're younger, but I could imagine this being very complex with, say, a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old, and that kind of open dialogue and the open exchange of feelings and emotions. I know this kind of sounds like woo-woo, and
oh my gosh, connection is so important. And this is really key too, because you want their feedback. You want their honest feedback too, because you
want their help. Like, what is working best for you? What have you always wanted when it came to, writing essays? I know it can be like kind of a strange thing. Is like, what do you want when you have to write an analytical essay? What are your
goals as a student, especially if you've got a younger student? That's kind of different. You're setting more of their goals. I mean, they can definitely tell you what they're interested in and you want their input. But if you have an older student, what are their life goals or their real interests? You definitely want their input, and you want them to be honest with their feedback to you. So this is about you express to them your feelings, and you encourage them to be honest and transparent back with you about how they feel, so you can work together to, you're not going to hurt mommy's feelings if you say that you don't like the way that this is going. And that doesn't mean that just because they said they don't like math that you're like, got to scrap that curriculum. But it may give you a starting place to say, maybe I need to do math in the morning when they're fresher, or maybe I need to change this up, or maybe we play more games, or whatever.
Mom, you don't need to look over my shoulder. I can do this alone. I feel nervous when you are sitting here staring at me, and I feel like I'm gonna have to perform or something like that. And that type of communication can alleviate some of the strain around the education, because it may not be a curriculum problem. It may be a you problem or a them problem, or
you're all just figuring out, I don't like doing this in the kitchen. I like to do it in my room because I feel I can focus more, whatever it is.
Like my daughter likes to read her, on her All About Reading curriculum, she likes to read her reader book on the couch, and she doesn't like to sit at the table. It just feels like she's performing for everybody, or somebody's watching her. She has a lot more comfort sitting on the couch. I mean, it could just be a simple thing like that.
Right. It doesn't have to be complex, but this is the point where you want to get their feelings, and then you want to get their input, right? You want them to, these kids are really used to school telling them exactly what they're going to learn. So without their input at all. So this is a point to be transparent and stress to them that this is their education. You are a partner in their education. You're on the team with them, but you're here to support them in the goals that they want and the learning for them. This is a tailor-made education. So you want their input. You absolutely want their input.
And this may be the first time that your learner is being asked, like you can imagine a ninth grader or a middle schooler, what do you like? And let's start to build something around what you want to do.
Right. Or what do you think you want to do as a profession? Maybe we could build something around what you're interested in doing.
Hey, you want to get into medicine, or you want to get into nursing, or you want to get into computer science, or a STEM, or the arts, or whatever it might be. Let's build something, because you got to remember that if they've been at school for some prolonged period, like all of elementary into middle school, that child has been, run through a one-size-fits-all curriculum solution. There's been very little ability to adapt what is being taught to their interest. And now this is a radical moment where they get to choose or have a lot of say in what goes on and what is being learned, and how that learning is structured. They have never had that opportunity before. We were just talking about some show notes about writing and the writing process that we're going to be doing an episode on. And, they may not know how to make those decisions, when it comes to writing. The same thing here. They may not know that they can even say, well, yeah, Mom, I was wondering if I could do some, computer programming stuff. Right. I've always been interested in that. I play video games and stuff, and I'd like to learn how to program. Right. But they would never have that opportunity before.
Absolutely. And you may, need to ferret out. We talked last week about trying to find things that they might be interested and kind of get them excited. But this is the point where right now, in this, for the sake of transparency, you're going to be asking for their input. You're also going to be letting them know that this is a time, especially for a little bit younger kids too, this is a time when they may have big feelings.
Oh, yes.
And that is okay. Whether they want to share them with you or they don't feel comfortable. I mean, hopefully they feel comfortable sharing with you. But I think you need to acknowledge at this stage that it's okay to have lots of feelings. And it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt mom or dad's feelings if you know, if you're a little unhappy with this, or you feel you're having big emotions about this transition, or you're worried about it. It's like, you know, it's not going to hurt our feelings. We talk about it and acknowledge that there may be lots of different feelings they have, and that's totally normal and okay. Because you wouldn't want it to like scare them that they're having all these different emotions now.
Especially when they're in school, there is this peer pressure element to conform, right? And they may not have that ability, or have never had that ability to voice their feelings. You know, like, oh, I can't say I don't like this because I have 30 other, you know, students in the classroom that, you know, might have an opinion on my feelings, right? And I don't want to share that because that makes me nervous, or I'm fearful that somebody will make fun of me, or I'll, you know, sound stupid or something like that. And they may not feel like they can put those emotions, and you want to open up that door and say, no, this is one of the points of reasons why we're doing this, is that we want
absolutely
you to have that ability.
We want to hear from you. And that's where you really stress too, that this is a partnership.
Yeah.
I think that it's so important at this first step of deschooling, is stressing that this is a team. This is a partnership between you and your learner. This isn't a top-down driven educational approach like they're used to at school, because even though they think, okay, I'm homeschooling, but now mom's my teacher. Well, yeah, mom's actually your partner, and they're going to guide and support and help you in your educational journey. They're not a draconian, you know, a top-down driven.
We're not dictating this.
Exactly.
You know, from on high. Yeah.
Right. And I think if you stress the partnership, that really helps get kids' minds framed the correct way. For younger kids, you know, your first, second, third graders, it might not resonate they might not understand that. But, you know, you're talking about a middle school child or older, they're really going to get that whole, partnership, that this is not what they're used to.
Well, even like what we're going through with our second grader, I feel like we can have that level of discussion even at this level, where it's like, hey, is this working for you? Is it not working for you? How can I make this better? You know, you can get that feedback. You can send the customer survey to your child. You know, I'm going to do an NPS survey. And would you rate this? Would you recommend this father to other friends and family?
Well, and this is a point too, where part of the deschooling process definitely is continuing to solicit open feedback.
Yeah.
Right? You're telling them at the beginning, I want your feedback. I want to hear from you. I want your input. I want your feelings. But then you got to check back through as you're going through this process and say, how's things going? How do you feel? All of these pieces of transparency are going to need to be things that don't just happen once. They continue to happen. And I think what goes along with that is telling your learner that this is an evolving process. It's not static. Whatever we start with on day one of our homeschooling journey, it is truly a journey, and we're going to evolve together, and it's going to change, and it's going to look different some days, and we're going to find it out the right way, but we're going to do it together. So I think that gives, I think if you can set all of those open and transparent foundational pieces, and then keep reminding your learner through this deschooling process about these different points that, you know, I'm here to support you. I'm on your team. This is going to evolve and change. It's okay if you have big feelings. How do you think it's going? What are you interested in? You know, continuing to ask those questions and just come from a place of real curiosity and openness is going to do so much of the heavy lifting for you and help, because so much about regular school, it's purely academic, but homeschool is not. There's so much about emotion and connection, and you know, the psychology of, you know, our kids and our family dynamics, and there's a lot more wrapped up in it. So I think that this is a great basis for the deschooling process.
Well, and the transparency naturally leverages into the idea of the education and the various aspects of education that I think key in on the fact that you have a good, you know, relationship that you've built. You know, as we talked about before, that we may have some baggage as educators and understanding what, you know, what does school look like? That quote unquote looks like. And as homeschoolers, we all understand that there is no looks like. It is what works with your family, and each and every
Absolutely.
situation is different. Each and every child in the household is different. So if you're thinking about deschooling multiple children, your methods of education may be different across those two children. You may have a child who's very, into school booky work type of thing, want to do a lot of workbooks, and the other one is more of a projects-based, experiential, getting their hands dirty and being more hands-on on things. Or you may have a high-touch child and a low-touch child, and understanding that even within what quote unquote looks like, it could be different just across the children in your household, and even so far as it could be different across different subjects. Like my daughter is starting to look more like a workbook math student and a very high-touch reading student, where she needs a lot of interaction and whatnot, but with these like moments of isolation where she can go off and read alone and do things alone. So even between the subjects, I have to approach it slightly different. And you need to make sure that you're not thinking that, okay, everything has to look the same.
Right.
And having that baggage come with you.
And then it should look like school at home. This is that
right.
point where
That school at home is a big one.
Yeah, if you haven't homeschooled before, you may have this conception of it that isn't really what it's going to end up being in the end for your family. So you really have to let go of what school looks like, and what you think it should look like, and really embrace this period and the freedom to experiment. And this is mostly for parents. Kids, I don't think that they need to like let go of what school looks like. They're going to kind of, you're setting that tone as the parent. But if you're going to try to take school and translate it to home, that's going to be probably a recipe for challenges, right? Because very few homeschools actually look like a school classroom.
Yeah.
I've yet to meet one. Maybe there are some out there that their homes really function like a classroom, but I don't know many that do, or any that do. So we have to, as parents, we've got to let that go, and that can be a real challenge.
Well, and I think, just going more towards talking about like what school is doing, like the structure of school, when we think about it, is trying to teach, to as many children as possible with the least amount of labor, right? So I have one teacher. How many kids can that one teacher teach? When you get down to the one-on-one or the one-on-two or the one-on-three, it can look drastically different.
Right.
If you think about like in the same idea, maybe if I could draw an analogy to like a big farm and like a small farm, right? So a big farm is very mechanized. They're using GPS. They're doing, soil testing. They're growing one crop across, a large area.
A lot of monoculture.
Yeah. And then if you're looking at like a small hobby farm or, an organic farm that's down the road, they may only have 1 acre, 2 acres. They're using different tools. They're growing maybe more variety. They're maybe using different methods and maybe a lot more hands-on. So if you can kind of see the difference between, say, like a mass production education system and kind of like a hobby farm type of education system,
absolutely. It's a good analogy.
I think that goes that way. And when you're doing that, you're starting to get a lot more input. And so once you get past what you think school should be, is now you're starting to think about, well, what can school be to my learner, and what can my learner give me in the terms of guidance, and what can I do to create that and foster that?
Right. So this is about asking your child for input about what they're interested in learning. So if they don't know, grab some library books, watch some documentaries about things that you think they might like, see what might pique their interest. So if they already know, great, run with that. If they don't, make some educated guesses and take some chances, right, on things that you think would be nice. I'm going to be a leader this year for Girl Scouts, for Brownies, and the first month, whatever, it's supposed to be girl led. So the girls are supposed to pick their badges. Well, the Brownies aren't going to know what they want to do at the beginning. No. So we as leaders me and my co-leader are going to choose badges that we think the kids will benefit most from at the beginning, that they will like the most, and it will get that ball rolling so that we can then ask them what badges they want to do for the rest of the year after they've had a little bit of taste of what Brownie badge work looks like, and they'll kind of have an idea. And this is kind of a similar thing where you as the parent educator are going to make some decisions up front certainly get their input if they've got it to give. And you're going to be making some educated guesses based on what you know about your child, about what you think they might like, and you'll start in that direction. And you may have to pivot, but you have to kind of pick a direction and start with that. And once you pick that direction, you should be looking for free or cheap, low expectation lessons. So the best way to start with this is like unit studies, things that, can help you and your student kind of learn. And we talked about that forming, storming, norming thing, performing. This is all about where you're forming your team. So pick things that, don't go out and buy $1,000, curriculum. Even if you have some charter funds that you need to use, like maybe just wait on those a little bit and pick something that's cheap. Start low with low expectations so that you don't spend a whole bunch of money and then you hate this and your learner doesn't like it, but you've already wasted all of your charter school money or whatever you've got on this big curriculum. You want to go ahead and take this opportunity to pick smaller, more affordable things. So that's my best advice in getting started, because this is a period where you might have to make a lot of changes. So don't invest in something big, and don't invest in something that takes so much time or super involved. You've got to get a ton of books for it, or it requires a bunch of other materials or manipulatives. Start with things that are more contained and are a little bit easier to, lower barrier to entry.
Work out the kinks, right? Like don't try to carve the bear out of a log if it's your first time. Get a little whittling stick and learn the basics, right?
We're big on analogies today.
I'm going to come out with a lot of them. We're
rolling in analogies.
Working out, like don't go and spend $3,000 on a home gym when you don't know what you want to do. Buy a kettlebell, maybe some dumbbells and some exercise bands, and see what you like, right? Like,
get a pair of walking shoes and just start there.
Just start there. I know it's like the same thing with homeschooling, especially if you're new to it. I loved your idea about the unit studies. Find something that they might enjoy, get into it. Now, obviously, you got math and you got reading, and depending on what level you're at, whether you have a middle schooler, high schooler, elementary, or early learner, you're going to have to make decisions based on, what those things are. Even more important is setting those metrics and those expectations for you as the educator. Like,
this is big.
What am I trying to get out of this? What does my year look like? Should I be planning my entire year and expecting that my learner does X, Y, or Z when I don't even know what they're interested in, or I don't even know what style of curriculum they're going to want? Should I be laying out all those expectations like, a roadmap, and I'm going to stumble out of the gates? And what does that do to my psyche as an educator if my child is like, well, I don't like Bookshark, and I don't care that you spent $1,000 on this curriculum.
Let's not do that.
Like, let's not put you in that type of like depression. So you go out into the homeschool forums and you're like, my kid hates every curriculum. This is a disaster. What do I do? Right. Start small, like what you said, and set your expectations and achievable, right? The goals that are achievable.
Right. Yeah. I think that's totally true. When you talk about expectations, this is one of those big pieces where parents need to really let go of academic achievement. And what we who have been through public or private school systems think about what academic achievement means, because this is about what grade level are they on, and are they meeting all the metrics of their grade level and all that stuff. This is a really hard thing to do. Okay. So our advice is to really look beyond success being measured by tests and grade level assessments and things. So if you intend to go back to school next year, if you intend to re-enroll, then obviously you're going to want to make sure that your learner is keeping up with the grade level expectations. And you're going to want to do some assessing towards that. And we totally get that. But in this initial deschooling period, even if you're going to have to do that later, our advice would be to create some of your own metrics. Really get to the purpose of what you based on your purposes for homeschooling and where you think your child's at, what are your metrics for success?
And those metrics could be social and emotional. They may not be academic things. You may want to see that your
Right.
student is engaging more. They were not engaging before, they are engaging now.
Right. Your student hated reading, and your goal is that they pick up a book and read it for pleasure. That was our goal this year.
Yeah.
Our goal this year was that our daughter was going to pick up a book and read it because she wanted to. No one was asking
Thanks,
her to.
Pete the cat.
Pete the cat. That kid finally picked up a book and she read a ton of books because she wanted to get the Pete the Cat book from the library's reading program and she read like 20 Pete the Cats. She read them at night. She read them in the morning when she woke up. I found her with a book in the car. She was like reading all the time, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is what we waited for. This was our metric. We wanted her to start reading for just pleasure, and she's finally started doing it. So make metrics that are meaningful to you, not an educational committee, right? That's not what this is about. So what is important to you? What's important to your learner? And really go easy at first. Kind of these are going to be maybe some low expectation metrics, and know that the metrics may change as your year goes on. So if you do intend to enroll back into school next year, maybe your initial metrics is some smaller things. Like let's say that your learner was behind in math. So your initial metric is just to get them to a place where they feel confident in math. Maybe they're not even at grade level yet, but they're confident, and it's not a struggle to do it. They don't hate it anymore. I mean, maybe that's your metric.
You may have to go back and review some aspects of it. Like I was tutoring a student, I think just before the pandemic, and I was realizing that they were having some issues with some basic, arithmetic, and they were doing, algebra. And I'm like, well, you're having trouble adding and subtracting, positive and negative numbers. Maybe you should spend a little bit of time practicing adding and subtracting positive, negative numbers without the X's and the Y's and all the other stuff in there, or the powers of, of two, powers of three. Let's try to make this a little bit easier, because I think you're struggling in the basics and you don't have a good level of mastery. And you may have that same issue where your student is struggling with this type of math. Well, that's because maybe they've lost some grounding on the year before, the year before that. And they just need to be, they need to be gone through a nice little review in order to them to feel like they have the confidence to do this new math. You may need to approach it in that manner. They may not be enjoying reading because they have to read stuffy books or things that they don't enjoy. Well, maybe they want to read Minecraft books, or they play Halo. Maybe they want to read some novelized versions of Halo stories and stuff like that. Just something that like grabs their attention and gets them excited about, the experience of reading. And maybe you have to, they're not reading those, classic books that they tend to have to read in 9th grade or 8th grade, whatever it might be, Kill a Mockingbird or Tom Sawyer or whatever it might be. Maybe they need to read something a little bit more fun. And then you build your metrics around that, right? And the excitement of getting them involved. And maybe you bring in something that's cool that might be a little bit different. Like we were just talking about today, the story of Gilgamesh, right? Or you go read Beowulf and you maybe watch it with a movie, and you start to think about being dynamic in the ways that you're approaching whatever the challenge is, whether it's literature or math, history, or whatever it might be that they might be struggling with. How can you be different there? And approach that and easing yourself into this new routine of being a homeschooler, finding the new rhythm. What does your day-to-day look like? How much do they need to do? Am I worrying about, am I doing enough? Am I doing too little? Am I doing too much? Finding that new routine with your student, I think is critical.
Yeah. So we did some Am I Doing Enough episodes. We did Kinder first and second. We'll link them in the show notes. So you can get an idea. What we did basically was we broke down a public school day and all the things they did versus kind of what we did in homeschool. And you can see just how much kind of wasted time there is in the classroom because they have to teach all these kids and they don't have that individualized time. So if you're worried that you're not doing enough, you kind of have to, this is a parent deschooling part where you've got to let go of the number of hours. So really take a good listen to those, because even if you're not, schooling a second grader, it extrapolates out, right?
Yeah, it does.
Into the higher grades too, that you can kind of get a sense of where all that time in the classroom goes and where you would save. So think about that and then kind of build a homeschool routine that you think makes sense based on what you have to do, but really ease into that slowly with your learner, because this is all new for them. And as part of the deschooling process, you're finding what works best. We talked about whether you should like work with your kid in the morning versus in the afternoon. And it makes a huge difference when it comes to our daughter, what time we work with her. And I know that a lot of kids are like that. So, you may need to test out a few different types of routines during this time where you test a few different times of day that you do it, which subjects to do first and then which ones after. Should you go on a walk or play outside first before you school? There's a whole lot of dynamics, and feel free to experiment, but don't say like, hey, Monday we're starting school and here's our, 4.5 hour plan that broken down by every 15 minutes. I have seen this before on the Facebook groups where the moms go, does this look like a good plan before I start my first day? And everybody's like, whoa, hold your horses. Like, maybe just ease into it. You might start with just like one subject at a time and find where that fits best and then kind of build on it, add another. And, this is a time where you don't dive in. Just start wading into the pool before diving head first.
Yeah, it's a kind of balance of learning the different styles and the anxieties of that learning, and trying out different curriculums and methodologies that might, work best for your student. I mean, all the things that you just pointed out is a lot of these nuances of approaching the learner in what fits best for them. Each and every one of those learners, and more analogies, are like a Lego piece, right? And you need to find the best way to fit that Lego piece into the board, right? And how do they fit best, and where do they need to be placed to be most effective? And because when you're not being effective, I've noticed this when I'm not doing things effectively, it just creates more time, and it's more time with you spending in front of them, maybe frustrated, and that can create negative experiences. I find when I'm when I can find the groove, things go really fast. And it's really smooth.
Yeah, it's funny how amazingly smooth it goes when everything is like, it's all firing, all cylinders.
Holy cow, did we just do homeschooling in 45 minutes, 50, an hour and a half?
Right.
Like it didn't take us 2.5 hours to do homeschool today, or it didn't take us 3 hours to do homeschool, right?
Right. We noticed, for example, with our daughters, that if they watch cartoons in the morning, we get terrible homeschool.
Yep.
So we've just noticed that. If they get up in the morning and instead they have breakfast and they play or they do art, we have much better homeschool.
Yep.
And we've noticed too that if we do morning basket and then take them outside for a nature walk and then come back, we have even better homeschool. So there's different ways. This is your time. You're going to try out different curriculums. So don't get married to anything specifically. I mean, that's what we talked about, that free cheap thing. And those different curriculums too are going to help you understand your learner's different learning style, and are probably going to help you suss out where they have learning anxiety from whatever they did in school. So it's interesting. We've talked to parents before who've said that, I've talked to several at our parent partnership where they've started the process of homeschooling and they didn't realize that there was a problem at school. Like they pulled their kid for one reason, let's say bullying or something. But then they started actually homeschooling and went like, oh, well, shucks. My kid's got a whole bunch of math anxiety. I didn't even know about that.
Yeah, right.
Because it wasn't reported by their teacher, so they just didn't even know about it. So there's some of that stuff that you're going to find out as you go through different curriculums. And if you do feel the need that you need to assess your child, then just be really cautious about that during this period. There's a lot of kids that come with testing anxieties, and testing causes a lot of stress. If you need to figure out, you need to assess them because you need to figure out like where they're at in math or where they're at in reading, you can use things like All About Reading or Right Start Math have assessments on their websites that you can use to try to place your child. You can also do something a little gentler. We had a great episode a few weeks back about IXL, which is an app-based program that we use with our daughter that she really likes, and she's been a little hesitant about reading, and she loves it for reading, and it is an assessment tool, and it will give you all kinds of information. So if your child's coming home and you're like, I don't even know where they're at, I have to assess, but they've got testing anxiety, you might be able to find an app-based program that might help you kind of level them in a gentle way. Just be really cautious during this time because the stress of testing and all that baggage is kind of can be really demotivating during this time with kids. So, if you need to assess, be cautious.
We talked a little bit about a few minutes ago about the idea of meeting your learner where they're most challenged. One of the big things is reading a lot, reading actively, approaching what the learner wants to learn and experience and what they enjoy the most. I think there are so many kids who have during some point in schooling, and that they can be at different points, but I think for most kids, and I think you and I both had it in high school, maybe middle school, where we lost that love of reading, because the reading became
boring.
It became work. And like work at school, I had to read this story, I had to write this essay.
Yeah, I wasn't interested in it.
I wasn't interested in it, and I'm spending all this time reading and writing with things I don't like, or I wasn't as interested in, when I really just want to read that fantasy book, and I really just want to read that graphic novel, or I really just want to, I want to write my own graphic novel. I don't want to read this stuffy classic book because I don't care about it. I want to write something that I only like Space Marines, and I want to read about those things. Those are I think we have to give and take. Like, we want them to know good literature. We want them to know classic themes that abstract to human psychology and human experience and all those type of stuffy things that we talk about in literature classes, the characters and the meaning of stories and those deeper meanings having, telling us something about the human condition. Those are great. And that's great. In an AP literature class, fantastic. Writing books, great. You got to be a little psychologist. You got to learn psychology and you got to learn these type of things. But I think what's more important is that we get people who read, and they read actively, and they learn better writing through reading, and they get excited about the act of reading. I think a lot of kids will lose that in schools. I know a lot of kids. I have my cousin who, I remember seeing him, and I asked, "Hey, are you still reading a lot?" He goes, "No, not anymore.
Didn't have time for it.
Didn't
want to do it.
It's too busy. I'm too busy."
During this deschooling time, read a lot to your kids. It doesn't have to be high literature, as you said. Embrace the fact that it may be silly. Like, you can get to Melville later. This is about connection.
Always time for Melville. Ariel.
This is about connection, right? This is about, you can read while they draw or they play or you're snuggling. This is all connection time, rediscovering the joy of reading, the love of great books. And, this is worth all the Magic Tree House, right? I would learning that books are something to love is worth hours of reading silly books, if that's what they want, right? If our daughter wants us to read the I Need a New Butt book, like over and over again.
They love that book.
They love that book.
They point it out every time I go
There's
to Walmart.
even a game at the store they almost made us buy at Walmart the other day. Anyways, I digress. But the point is, it doesn't matter what you're reading. It's that they enjoy the act of being read to or of reading themselves, embrace where they're at. So the next thing is really in this education section is to educate yourself. So one of the biggest things of deschooling is to get yourself out of the school mindset, is to listen to this podcast, watch YouTube videos, read great books, join Facebook groups for homeschoolers.
Find supportive environments.
Right. Learn about the different methodologies and approaches. You need to kind of surround yourself and immerse yourself in this new world so you can kind of understand all the different ways you could go, because you have lots of options. And it's not going to look like school, but what is it going to look like? And you need to see all these varied examples. We have a wonderful series of homeschool journey interviews with a bunch of different parents, and they talk about what their homeschools look like. And guess what? They all look different.
They all do.
And so I think it's really great. You need to see that because what you want to do, the last big step in this education part, is you want to really create a big supportive learning environment. This is, and listening to those journeys is going to help you see what other parents are doing and maybe give you some great ideas. You want to make sure that you're making books and supplies readily available. You have a workspace that's inviting in your house, right? Nobody wants to homeschool in the middle of clutter. So you want to, make a space that's cozy. If that's a cozy reading corner, or you've got a table, your dining room table is set with all kinds of art supplies all the time. If I did not have a 4-year-old, we would have a table set with markers and colored pencils and all that stuff all the time, that our daughter could just be creative whenever. So whatever that looks like to you, make sure that you don't have to make a whole homeschool room, but just make sure that you've got books and supplies and things available, that you're making this environment really inviting for your student.
I think that's a great way to kind of round up the idea of the education and, grounding your education with through transparency education. Next thing I think, is to explore, because the last thing you want to do is say, okay, I'm going to start to homeschool my student, no matter what age or group they are. And then we're locked in the house. We're not allowed, like it's like we're in a thriller and we can't leave the house.
Right. This is the time to go and do all that stuff you never had time to do before because you were so busy.
Trust us, we all know, where all the homeschoolers listening to this know, and you're home, you're about to deschool, and you're listening to this podcast and you're trying to figure out what it is. Next to you, you don't see them, but there are, thousands of other people listening to this, and they all know that it's the best time to go to things is during the middle of the day, because there's nobody there. The museums, the zoos,
the science center. Get yourself annual passes, right? Yeah. Get out and explore. Get to the parks, the local parks.
They're all empty at this time.
We have like a little museum in our little town, a historical society museum. I mean, go, right? We have a reptile museum. We don't live in a very big town. We have these kind of quirky little things.
Hey, the reptile guy's pretty cool.
He's really cool. So this is the time to get out and explore and show your homeschooler, your new homeschooler, what they get to do that other students aren't having time for, right? Like, hey, guess what? We get to go to the zoo in the middle of the day. We have some friends who went to the zoo today. Because they're homeschoolers. Mom took off work and dad's the main educator, and they took their daughter to the zoo because they could, and they had a wonderful day and it wasn't at all crowded. So that's the kind of thing that you need to embrace and show them kind of the benefits of doing things out of sequence with the rest of family. So this is a great opportunity. Also, check out all the free events and things going on. There's the library.
Yeah, a lot of
all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of towns now are trying to get these they're trying to get people excited about the town they're living in. It's almost like every little town that's like got 10, 15,000 people has this push to discover your own town and all these fun things that happen, and
all kinds of community events. And you'll find that some things are during the day. This is a great time to really to do that.
Farmers markets and
all
whatnot.
Kinds of stuff, and then go and explore too local different businesses and things that may have like homeschool classes, like, homeschool swim classes. We have an aquatic center here. They have homeschool swim classes. There's homeschool dance classes and homeschool art classes, and they happen during the day. So start to explore your local community and find what can apply to you now that you couldn't do while your kids were in school.
Well, and once you get outside, you start to see all these things, you're going to start to spark creativity. And you want to really try to think about, how can we bring things that are interesting forward and maybe leave core to the backseat a little bit? I
mean, not to necessarily totally the backseat, but fostering creativity is a really important part of deschooling because schools focus on core almost to the exclusion of the other stuff, right? Yeah. They do the other stuff, they call it specials, and they do it for like a fraction of a time each day, assuming they got their core done. They don't take the time for art and all of that and music and all these other pieces, right? They don't take that time. So this is a great opportunity for you to do that, embracing art and music, getting them lots of supplies, letting your learner express themselves. They can build something out of cardboard or wood or build a fort in the backyard, or they can make their own cozy reading corner. The whole idea is about giving kids a creative outlet because they didn't really get to do that in school. And by giving them creative opportunities, it helps them to manage their emotions during this time too. It gives them an outlet. So I think the creativity is something to really embrace during this deschooling period.
Yep. Then beyond that, just getting outside and moving. It's something that we talk about a lot, is getting out and walking, playing sports outside, going biking, playing basketball, embracing that physical activity. A lot of times we know that our students who go to these schools or the private schools, they're stuck in the chairs all day. They might move around a little bit.
They keep cutting recesses.
Yeah,
making them shorter.
Elementary, we know, less and less recess. They're not getting that physical activity, and I think, my first college I went to had a motto: sound minds. Oh no, my high school had the sound mind, sound body. And they knew those two things come together, right? The idea of studying really hard and then physical activity, they tend to work hand in hand. Like if you do a lot of physical activity, your brain has more, your body's not fidgety, you can be calm, you can then do your work. And I think one of the things with my high school was not only do we have small classes, like, 78 kids per grade type of thing, they had some statistic that 80 or 90% of the students that we have engage in extracurricular activities and sports. And so we had our kids who are physically athletic and also really good at academics. And I've always kept that in my mind as sound mind, sound body. And even now with my homeschooling, I'm really starting to think about getting my kids outside. Like with my daughter, we'll do a couple lessons and I'll say, hey, let's get outside and shoot some baskets because I want you to get better at dribbling and shooting baskets and whatnot. Hey, let's get outside and let's do some volleyball practice because I know you're going to be doing volleyball this fall for the first time, and I want you to be good, and I want you to have fun, and I want you to have the experience. So let's do some practicing. Hey,
let's go on a nature walk.
Let's go on a nature walk. Let's talk about our local trees, and let's go visit the river. Let's go visit those lakes. Let's do a hike up to the dam that's right up the road. Let's go, down the way and see these beautiful mountains. Let's see if we can go to the coast and look back. Like, we have the Cascades here, and there are points where you can be on the coast in the Puget Sound and look back, and you will just see this panorama of mountains.
Mm-hmm.
What's that big one to the north? Well, that's Mount Baker. What's the big one to the south? Well, that's Mount Rainier. And what are the ones in the middle? Pilchuck and Three Sisters, and all. You can see all the mountains, right? Like, have that experience. Go to the islands. We have a lot of islands here in the Puget Sound. Yeah. Whatever the geography is of your area, really embrace being outside and getting moving and having them experience the world around you. Because last thing you want to do is have them, they're stuck in a classroom or they move between classrooms, but they're stuck in the school. Right? It's in between the walls and the glass, and life is stuck between walls and glass. And when you're homeschooling, it doesn't have to be stuck between walls and glass. The world is essentially your classroom, and you should really embrace that. And
absolutely.
I'm a big proponent of that, of getting them out and thinking about, what is in your local area, well, not just your town, but your region, your geography, and all the fun things that are out there in the world. And you don't have to be stuck in a classroom all day long. And think about like you're going out with your mom and dad, or your mom or your dad or whatever, and doing your schooling. What a great time to have great conversations, right?
Yeah, this is another part of the connection, right? Those nature walks, that time spent playing basketball together, all that. This is, again, connecting and getting all that fresh air and stuff. It's so helpful.
Yeah.
So the next piece we wanted to talk about with deschooling is about sharing your own talents. This is a time where you need to take things that you love to do and build connection with your learner by sharing with them. Do you love to cook? Great. Let's see about getting your learner in the kitchen with you and making something they might be interested in. Or does grandpa play the piano? Might be a great chance for grandpa to bond with your student by doing piano together or whatever. You don't have to take on everything, but the point is about sharing a piece of yourself. And this is, again, part of that transparency and openness and saying like, hey, we're a team. I told my daughter, like, I love musicals. And she's like, I could be into that. Like, okay. So we started studying musicals together, and now we go to the theater, once every other month or something, and we see something and we have a musical chart and we scratch it off. Yep. So it's like a thing that we've done because that's something that I love and she loves sharing it with me. So you need to share of yourself. It's a big part of, I think, the partnership and being very authentic with your student.
We talked a little bit earlier about finding that community and the importance of that. But really finding friends and having people you can lean on, whether it's through a co-op, a parent partnership, or just getting enrolled in other homeschooling groups, you will discover other parents that are in the same situation as you.
Right. You need another homeschooling parent. You need a homeschool bestie. Find your people, right? You need somebody that you can
we worry
talk
about
with.
The kids' socialization. You need socialization.
You do. And I think this is a big part of the deschooling process, right? Your kids need to develop some new friendships so that they can grow as homeschoolers and find their community and find that normalcy and take some of that anxiety away of, would they be weird? Would they not have friendships anymore? All that kind of stuff, right? Friends is great. They need to find friends, but you need to find friends because you need parents to bounce stuff off of. You need to say like, oh my gosh, this morning I tried to do this and it did not work. Do you got any ideas? And you're hearing from these other homeschool moms who are like, okay, wait.
That was my last Tuesday.
Yeah, that happened. Oh, here's what I did. Whatever. You need close homeschool mom or dad or whatever friendships to help you. And one of the great places you can look is on your local Facebook groups for your area, local homeschool Facebook groups,
Co-ops,
and
meetups.
Yep, meet up, get yourself out there. Even if you tend to be more introverted, you're not as outgoing, this is a point where you really need to meet some other folks.
The homeschool Girl Scouts that we found, like our whole Girl Scout troop is
They're all homeschool.
They're all homeschoolers. I mean, what a great way to not only have your learner meet new friends, but also for you to meet new parents.
Now I have tons of moms that I know,
Exactly.
and I can be like, oh, what are you using for math? Because this isn't working out for me or whatever. Like you need some people to bounce ideas off, and it's really helps you get into the culture of homeschooling by getting in with some folks that are currently active homeschoolers.
And all these things, the education, the getting out in the community, sharing things with your learner, all of these things, and the transparency and the communication and all these things wrap up into kind of like a general ethos that you probably want to have, which is this is a journey. Your children are going through.
You and your children.
You guys we're going on an adventure. and you're going on a journey, and you want this to be a good experience. And you need to have all these things. I mean, listen, as a homeschooling parent, some days, man, just just not cutting it. And I'm just not into it today or whatever. We totally understand. That's normal. That's okay. Doesn't have to be 100%. Doesn't have to be soft lighting with, Martha Stewart lighting and everything.
These YouTube videos, man, they just make it look like...
They make it look perfect. And these children are sitting there.
They're doing all their Montessori stuff.
What you don't realize is they're strapped into the couch. Like the mom carefully just...
I don't know.
She tied them to the couch and they're not able to get up. It's just painted white and it looks like the white couch. I see some of these
and they're like, got white cream colored couches. They're doing like Montessori projects. I'm like, there's not even any like gummy bears stuck to the couch cushions. Look at
my 2-year-old carrying Kool-Aid through the house.
Oh my gosh. I see some of these with the perfect lighting. I'm not saying that those lives don't exist. If that's your life, man, wow, I'm envious.
It doesn't lies.
But yeah, it's not all positive, but this period isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace. Exactly. So enjoy this journey, enjoy the deschooling process. Know that there's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days. Hopefully there's more good days than bad days, and that you start trending up towards, having lots and lots of good days. But enjoy this journey. Give yourself and give your student a lot of leeway. Mm-hmm. Give yourself some grace in this process, right? Because you don't want to be too hard on yourself, and you want your learner to know not to be too hard on themselves, right? Maybe you've got a learner who's super excited about homeschooling. They're like, yeah, I'm done with school. I want to homeschool. And then they start getting into it, and they immediately start struggling with one of the subjects that you're teaching. And then they're beating themselves up. Our daughter has kind of a perfectionist streak.
She does.
And that's one of her big problems with reading, is that she doesn't feel like it's okay to get things wrong or have to sound them out extra or have to ask for how to say something, and have to ask for help. That she really struggles with that. So, this is a point where you need to enjoy the journey yourself, and don't be hard on yourself, and tell your learner not to be hard on themselves.
Yeah, right.
Because this is a process for them too, right? And they need to enjoy kind of figuring out how everything fits together and how it's going to work.
Yeah, and then remember that you don't have to be on the same sequence as public schools. Now, obviously, with the one caveat, that is, if you're planning to re-enroll soon or in the near future, you probably want to try and keep in line with what they're doing. But if you're kind of on your own and your state doesn't have very rigorous requirements of reporting or whatnot, then you can have a lot more freedom. Like, your state has to do, your state's history this year. Well, maybe you don't have to do that this year.
Every third grader in our state does state history, whatever it is. Or, every third grader does ancient civilizations or whatever. And you're like, we're not into it. Don't.
Yeah.
Just don't. It's cool. We always were worried about, we said before we started homeschooling, we want to keep up with what the kids in the public school know, because we wouldn't want our daughter to get into a situation where everybody knows about something and she doesn't. Mm-hmm. That has never, ever happened. I have never seen a kids talk about what they're learning in school like when they're playing. Nobody's ever like, well, you don't know about Abraham Lincoln? Nobody's doing that. So maybe we're not at the level yet, and second graders just don't really talk about what they learn. But I have listened to the older girls at Girl Scouts, and they are 11 and 12-year-old, and nobody's talking about what they're learning in homeschool. They're having normal teenage type conversations about other stuff. So I think don't keep up with the Joneses. It doesn't matter. Do what interests you and what you're into. There's time later to catch up with whatever it is they need to know that other kids already know.
Yeah, I've seen enough YouTube man on the street interviews to know that most people don't know anything. So,
Ain't that the truth?
ain't the truth. Next thing is, obviously, we talked about managing your expectations. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Jumping into it, I find sometimes that I like to do a little bit too much, and it might be like, hey, we're pushing too much information through, and it's not really that important to move this fast. We do homeschooling all year round. So I like to take advantage of the fact that, we get an extra 3 months of education a year. And I need to put that in perspective and understand that, well, maybe I don't need 3 extra months. Maybe an extra month or month and a half is fine. And maybe I have a little bit more free time here and here and here. And I can spread that out and have a little bit more enjoyable experience. And my learner doesn't get burned out, or we're doing too much, or we're biting off too much. Like, I've got to manage 7 curriculums. And you don't have to do that. That's, try to approach it in a layered manner,
Right. Yeah. It's not like you have to, even if you have to teach our state's 11 subjects, you don't have to teach all 11 subjects at once. You could do 6 weeks of science and then do 6 weeks of history and then do
a unit study in the summer around the local tribes of our area.
Right.
Or the history of the state. You can cover that in a couple weeks.
Right. You don't have to do everything all at once because you will burn out and you'll burn your learner out.
Well, and there are some schools, I almost went to one, Appalachian State. May they burn forever for beating Michigan in that one game. But Appalachian State did this style of learning where they focus on one subject intensely for 6 weeks. And so you say, for example, you're in science, you only have one class. You don't have 4 or 5 college classes. And I don't know if they're still doing this, but they would do this for 6 straight weeks and they would only take one class. And that's all you end up focusing on. And you work on it and you're doing it for 3 or 4 hours a day.
Sounds really nice, actually.
And then after the end of that 6 weeks, you move on to your math class, or then you move on to your history class, and then you move on to your language class. And you really, really focus on intensively learning something. And so there's different theories on way to approach things. You don't have to maybe balance 7 or 8 curriculum plates at one time. Your student might say, I'd like to focus on one thing and really important, intensively. And maybe they'll say, okay, well, I'll do math and some of my reading or composition stuff here. And if I can just do a little bit of that every day, fine. But this other stuff, I'd like to do just 6 weeks, and then I want to move on to something else.
Right. Yeah. Don't layer too many things at once because it's just
remain
going to be
flexible
hard.
Is kind of what I'm saying.
Absolutely. If you can remain flexible, this is a real time of change, and there could be a lot of things that you need to work out and a lot of things that you need to do differently. So don't be married to anything specifically or one specific learning approach or one specific curriculum. Yeah. Really just try to kind of roll with it a little bit in this time period.
Yeah. Don't rush to this end goal. Oh my gosh, we gotta, do this curriculum, or that my school should look like this.
Yeah, my ideal homeschool is this, and we do these things every day, and we have this kind of connection. Then we do outdoor classroom, and we do kitchen classroom on the weekends. We have all this stuff, right? Because you've heard about all these other homeschoolers and their stories. Yeah, right. Maybe you've been listening to our podcast for a while, and you're like, this is the vision I have in my head of what my homeschool is going to look like, and I think that's great. Keep your vision, but don't rush yourself to get to that point. There is no, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to get to that ideal. I don't even know that we're at our homeschooling ideal yet. I don't know what the homeschooling ideal is, but I don't know. But I still think we could always be continuously improving. So I
think that's the engineer in both of us.
It is that seeking continuous improvement. So don't rush yourself to get to your end goal. And it's really important, your learner will show you that they're learning. Mm-hmm. So it may be unconventional, but you'll see whether your efforts are working. It's not a quick process. So, initially you need to enjoy the aha moments and the excited requests. If, hey, I want to explore this other topic, or, I'm really interested in, how engines work or whatever, rather than pushing for achievement. Enjoy those moments where things are clicking, because you will see, and every few days or whatever, our daughter shows us in some weird way that she's like, oh, she ties 2 books together we read 6 months apart and she remembers this piece or whatever. Or
She
I'll
remembers
overhear
that artwork here, and she points you. Goes, oh, in this book on page 34, there's the
yeah,
artwork.
and she finds it. Or I'll hear our daughters doing imaginative play, and they will play like they're from a country that we studied a year and a half ago, and they remember bits about it. So it's not necessarily in the conventional ways you would test that you might see that they're learning, but they are learning. You are going to get to see the kind of the proof in the pudding, but it's not going to be instantaneous. So just be patient.
Absolutely. And, moving to probably one of the more difficult portions, we have a whole episode on the naysayers. But when you are going into this kind of deschooling period, it may look extremely unconventional to people who are used to the education system, the larger, public school, private school education methodology. You may get a lot more naysayers because they may say, okay, well, fine, you're homeschooling, great. What math curriculum are you on? Well, what are you using here? And what are
How do
using
you
here?
know that they're learning?
How do you know they're learning?
How do you know this is the right decision for them? You could get a lot of people, but look, you've made a really brave decision.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking outside the box. You're putting your kids first. And it can be really scary, right? You can doubt yourself often, right? But you have to trust that it's all going to come together. And if nothing else happens, if you end up going back to school next year because this just didn't work for you, right? The homeschooling wasn't right for your family. Enjoy this time that you got to spend with your kids because you don't get this time back. So enjoy what you have now and, embrace it and just kind of let it go. We always said, initially your parents were not in support of us homeschooling, not like terribly in supportive, but they just didn't get it. They were very worried that our kids would be strange. And at this point, your mom is like telling people at the dentist's office, oh, you're thinking about homeschooling? Oh my gosh, you have to do it. My granddaughter's she's like proud as a peacock about how her grandkids are doing with homeschooling because the proof really was in the pudding. And she saw for herself. And I think that that's a real key to the naysayers that are close to you in your life, not the random people that you meet at the grocery store who are like, why aren't your kids in school in the middle of the day? For that, watch our episode or listen to our episode. But for the people in your life, this is about giving it time to develop and then they will see it, right? Or you'll go back to school. School's always there, right? Your public school will always be there for you.
It will always be there.
So that's all of our tips for deschooling. This is a really important
It's been a really
time.
good back-to-back episode.
Right.
Here.
But the last closing thought, we said this on the last episode, but above all else in your deschooling, all the steps, if you have a chance to choose connection, always choose it.
Mm-hmm.
Always choose connection over academics or anything else, because the most important thing you can do during this time is to build that strong relationship with your kids so that you guys can be successful together in the future. Yep. It's also about connection that we just want to really stress that if you have choices to make between, 2 different paths during this transitionary time, choose connection. Yep. Always choose connection.
Well, it's one of the things that we heard over the pandemic. Not true for everybody, but for a lot of people, they really, look back on some of the silver linings of that time period, which was, wow, I got to spend a lot more time with my family.
Yeah.
And I really liked that. I loved spending more time with my spouse. I loved seeing my kids more, and people got to experience that a little bit more. Now it was, obviously a rolling tragedy, but there were some elements in there that was, you'll hear people say, for all the bad, it was, well, I got this little bit of a good. I got to spend more time. We got to watch our youngest. You got to watch our youngest go from 7 months to 3 years, and you got to experience that because you didn't. I don't think you got to see it as much with our oldest because you were at work.
I was working, and
you were able to be home. And you saw him, and the experience of a 9-month-old banging on your door as you're on a meeting. Those memories will be there, and homeschooling is kind of like that experience all the way through, right? We're always home with our kids. We're experiencing with a lot more with our kids. We have more connection. We're guiding them and having that experience. And I agree with you. I think the connection is the one thing that I think with the homeschooling is you'll never look back and say, I wish I didn't do that, because having that experience with them is, whether it's for a year, 2 years, or 12, I think it's worth its weight in gold. So,
It is. And the connection is the thing that you rely on when stuff's not going well.
Yeah.
Right? When you are fighting through, when you're trying to get math done or whatever, and you
will have those moments. It's never going to be a smooth ride. Yeah.
But you lean back on your connection, right? Because there are times when if you have a strong connection, like you do with our daughter, you can say, hey, look, I know that this isn't the greatest thing right now, but we really need to do this together so that we can move on to this more fun thing. And how about we do this? And then, we'll jump to something you want to do. And because you have that connection, you can get through. Or if she's being just like really combative, you can say, Daddy's just really frustrated right now because of how you're treating me. And this is how I feel. And because you're well connected, she's like, oh, okay. And she clues into that, right?
Yeah.
It's the basis, the foundation of everything. And it is that tool that you need to pull on all the time in your tool chest to get through the tough days. The connection gets you through. Nothing else will. So, it's either that or lean on open bribery and take them to the Lego store. Okay, so let's end it. I know it was a long episode, but this is such an important topic. We just felt like we couldn't shortchange it. So if you have ideas on deschooling that we haven't talked about, leave us a comment on YouTube or
continue that conversation. Go to the Facebook group.
Yeah.
We'll do a real quick what we're consuming. That we were doing Is That Cake on Netflix is a show that our daughters are really into. Speaking of watching morning TV, they got to do that this morning, and they went right to the Netflix and they got the Is That Cake. It's just like a silly little game showy type of cooking show where contestants have to guess if things are cake or not, and then they're chefs, and then they have to go into like a competition to then make something, and these judges have to then guess which one is cake and which one's not. And it's a kind of a fun show. And it was really funny because my daughters were sitting there on the couch, and there's this point where like all 9 of the chefs have to like guess in this like, I don't know, living room, what things in the living room are cake. And it's like there's a couch, there's an ottoman, chairs and lamps and all this stuff, and a vase and all these books and whatnot. And they're all sitting there going, I think it might be the books. And my 2 daughters are like, it's the books. I think it's the books. No, it's the vase. It's the vase. And they're like doing their own little guessing.
Yeah, it's almost like a look and find.
It's like a look and find and everything. So it's really, really fun, really, really cute. Low stakes. It's not one of those like crazy cooking shows.
It could, however, though, make your student want to make elaborate cakes. So, I mean, proceed with caution, because our kids were like, hey, let's get fondant. I'm like, no, let's not get fondant.
Well, they know, because I as a joke, 2 years ago, my mother asked me for my birthday, what cake would you like? And I sent her, just as a joke, a dump truck cake, carrot cake that was made in dump truck, and I'll put it in the show notes.
And the wheels were little chocolate donuts,
chocolate donuts and stuff. And on my birthday, she came over and she's like, "Happy birthday!" And she opens up the cake and she made that exact dump truck cake. Yeah. She goes, I go, "Mom, I wasn't really serious." She goes, "Well, I called you on it." So I can see my daughter's doing the same thing. There was supposed to be a taco cake last year, but we didn't get around to it. So thanks, guys, for joining us. Hope you guys enjoy the deschooling episodes, and we'll move on to something fun next week, I think.
Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook, and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time.
Happy homeschooling!